It's the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. Welcome, one and all, to a very stuffed Dubcast. We have a lot to talk about this week.
Oh, yes, we do.
You know, and sometimes the off-season gods, they look down upon us and they turn their backs and say, no, you will starve. But this week,
they laugh in our faces with Monday morning news drops.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. We try to record on Sundays. We're not doing that this week. We're recording on a Monday, which was fortuitous because we got all this Michigan stuff that we can talk about. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk about Michigan. We're going to talk about NIL stuff because we got some interesting numbers out of Ohio State. We will be talking a little bit about, maybe some actual things related to sports as opposed to just scandal things. So like basketball commits, that's kind of fun. Some NCAA rule changes that they're going here for. We got the Olympics, which George doesn't care about, but I deeply care about. So I'm going to force him to talk about that. Carmen's crew is still dominating. And then a funny thing with college football 25. So we'll talk about all that. But let's start with the fun stuff, which is Michigan. And I mean, it's all fun stuff. But I was happy today to see that there are rumors on the internet. Now, I will say this is, I got to add the caveat before we get to all this. It's from Chris Ballas of thewolverine.com, which is an On3 site. That's their On3, guys. Chris has been, shall we say, shaky about some of the ongoing scandal stuff with Michigan, as have pretty much all of their, quote unquote insiders. But what he said, and then what we reported on, along with a lot of other people, is that the NCAA is about to issue their notice of allegation against Michigan, possibly some level 2 violations, possibly some postseason bans, is what, according to the report, has been bandied about. That, to me, show causes, all that stuff, whatever. I mean, most of Michigan's staff is gone. But the postseason ban, the potentiality of that makes me go, a little bit, because I really thought Michigan was going to get out of this completely scot-free. A postseason ban is not scot-free. It's not the death penalty, which I think a lot of Ohio State fans thought they were going to get. They're not getting that. It's not. Sorry, they're not. Sherrone Moore isn't going to be like banned from football or anything like that. But 1 or even 1 year of postseason bans feels significant. Am I stupid? Like, that seems like a legit punishment from the NCAA if they in fact go through with that.
Yeah, but it's not good enough because it doesn't punish the people that actually were responsible for committing the crimes here.
Right.
Now, before we get into that, relative to the point you're making about Ballas, it's and we're this major pot calling the kettle black. I mean, we at 11 Warriors, we try to be the leading secondary source in the Ohio State journalism space. We're not big on being the first ones to break anything. I can't necessarily.
Well, the Dubcast isn't. Our actual beat writers, will do that, and
I can't necessarily speak for Dan or Andy or Garrick or
those are professionals. Yes,
worked here in the past, but typically we are the ones that, I'm just speaking as the brand, we will confirm the stories that happen. I mean, obviously, 11 Warriors was the place that broke the Urban Meyer hire, so there have been moments of brilliance. But that we tend to be the ones that try to be a pillar of credibility in the chaotic space.
Right. Instead of throwing things at the fridge and see what sticks, we're the ones who are actually trying to make sure that something's true or not.
Yeah, instead of a certain ice cream affiliated outlet. If you want to call them that, or I like to think the Dubcast has more credibility than Menace to Sports, but I know you're afraid to go after Mr. Zach Smith.
Yeah, he scares me. I don't know.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make with that is that at the end of the day, we all still want to see Ohio State do well, even though we're attached at the hip professionally with the school and the athletic teams.
Right.
In the same way that the Michigan beat writers are.
Mm-hmm.
But because they have that attachment at the hip, I mean, there is much more of a willingness for them to kind of shy away from the truth of what is really going on relative to negative things at the program, then I think, I can't speak for the entire Ohio State journalism universe, but when, for example, the controversy with Brian Hartline happened, relative to him, kind of getting into a potential DUI that ended up not really being a big deal because it happened on his own property with a off-terrain vehicle. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I heard people that were fans of other Big Ten teams that were being openly critical, and this was shortly after the partnership happened, or the 1870 Society was announced, and people were wondering, oh, is 11 Warriors going to be complicit with the school now in terms of glossing up the image and then trying to shy away from the bad stuff. And full credit to Dan Hope, who was the man. I mean, he was out at the front of that story,
Yeah.
getting all of the immediate information for that as it was coming out.
Well,
So
and
like
right.
we try to be on top of the good and the bad, regardless. Like
100%.
we just try to give people the facts regardless of what's happening. I don't think the Michigan beat does that, and I think it's reflected in the fact that a lot of them tried to totally bury the Alex Ude story that
Mm.
happened in congruency with the Connor Stalions scandal that came out during the previous year. If you'll recall, Ude was the staffer that got dismissed when he was caught in a YouTuber pedophile sting trying to meet up with a 13-year-old girl at, I believe it was a Walmart or some sort of public place. But the Michigan beat didn't want anything to do with that story, in spite of the fact that Ude was a verified member of the football staff and that there was indisputable video evidence of what had gone on there.
Right.
So the reason I bring that up is because relative to Ballas saying, oh, this could just end up as just being a 1 or 2 year postseason ban, it's very, very possible that that is just the Michigan beat attempting to soften the blow, so to speak, some wishful thinking relative to what might actually be forthcoming. He could be correct. I have no reason to discredit his report, but this is a pattern of behavior that we have seen from journalists in that circle before, relative to them not wanting to touch the actually bad downside controversy stuff tied to that program.
Here's what I say. I think there's been more wishful thinking on their part in a lot of ways, and specifically as tied to Jim Harbaugh, right? Where they were, especially with, they were saying, all the way through the season, but especially leading up to the Michigan game, the new contract's in the works and he's not going anywhere. And
well,
blah,
Ballas
blah, blah.
specifically, if you recall, tried to cope with the Harbaugh to the Vikings thing by outright reporting, if the Vikings offer Harbaugh, he's going to leave Michigan. Like he reported that, and then Harbaugh didn't even end up leaving. So we've seen specifically from him before trying to cope with something potentially bad happening.
I don't
Michigan
think
football.
Let me put it this way: I don't think that I think they have some serious problems on the beat, and kind of these self-professed.
That's not even getting into any of the Schembechler stuff.
Yeah, but all of that aside, because that's a whole separate issue, in my opinion. I think that's a different kind of journalistic problem that they have. I think the larger issue with this is that they are playing so hard to the audience that they have to say, this is what we think we're going to happen, while still trying to massage, like you're saying, kind of massage that narrative to the people that are listening to it. And that's an issue for them. It's not, whatever the NCAA decides to do, that's what they're going to do, right? They can't change that. I do think that they have a credibility issue now because of the way that they reported on the Connor Stalions thing. Not because, it's this horrible, awful thing that, they should be pillared for not going after or whatever. It's a stupid, silly scandal, and I enjoy talking about it.
It's the worst thing that's ever happened
that's
in
right.
college
It's the worst thing that's ever happened in college football. But I guess my point is that this report from Ballas may be completely true. Like, that might be 100% dead on. It might be also complete BS. We don't know, and it's hard for anybody to really trust it because of the way that all this other stuff was reported up until then. It was just this kind of like wish casting stuff where it's like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is what's not going to happen. Now, I don't think that telling Wolverine fans that they're possibly facing a 2-year postseason ban is particularly comforting. Like that's significant. I think that's a significant penalty if that's what ends up happening.
Would you take a 2-year postseason ban if it meant you got to keep a national championship on your resume?
Oh, sure, yeah. But
so what is the punishment then?
Well, my point is that I don't. If that what he's saying is true, I don't think anything like vacating a national championship or any of that stuff was ever on the table. And frankly, I don't think it ever was. I would be.
I don't
shocked.
expect it to be either, but I would at least expect regular season wins to be vacated. Wins in which they have very direct evidence of Stalions participating in. I mean, he was off staff when they won the national championship.
Right.
So if you want
to
uphold that for Michigan, I can understand that. But for the games where that guy was participating, if you have evidence of them circumnavigating the rules, I don't understand why you wouldn't have them forfeit those wins.
Yeah. That's fair.
Fundamentally doesn't make sense to me, because you can put in a postseason ban, but that only ends up hurting the people that are left behind in the aftermath of this, not the people that were actually complicit in it. One of the two major players of which, one is now in the NFL and the other is now about to get a whole bunch of money from Netflix for something that comes out at the end of next month.
I've never been a guy who really I understand the vacating of wins just in principle, right? Because if you did something that allowed you to win a game, by cheating, whatever, and somebody finds out, then yeah, you should vacate that win. But I don't really buy into it as a punishment. I don't think that anybody cares. Nobody's gonna let me put it this way. Let's say they vacate.
It's more, I think, for Ohio State fans, a sore spot relative to the punishment that was handed down for.
Oh, of course.
Gate.
Of course,
the fact that there was a forfeiture of wins there. If that kind of disregarding of history is applied in that context and not in a case where a team verifiably cheated to get an advantage in order to win those games, it's blatant hypocrisy. So I think that's mainly why it's more of a sore spot here. Generally, I agree with you, but in the context of what has happened to this school relative to what has likely taken place here, it reeks rotten if a similarity in terms of punishment is not handed down or enforced.
No, I understand that. And if it's an Ohio State fan's perspective, then that's one thing. But if I'm a Michigan fan, I don't care. I don't care if they make me it's the same thing. As an Ohio State fan, I don't think that Sugar Bowl against Arkansas didn't count or didn't happen, right? I don't give a crap that it was technically, vacated or what. I don't care about any of that stuff.
But part of the reason we don't care is because we don't regularly engage in arguments with Arkansas fans. We haven't played them since.
That's true. Yeah.
When you're at each other's throats every year, engaging in discourse with Michigan fans, it's an important feather in your cap to be able, because their whole thing now is, they haven't beaten us for over 1,000 days, and we're 3-0 now in the last 3 years, and it's if you can just easily clap back at them and say you cheated, it doesn't count, and that's what's on the record. That's an important feather in your cap to have in your argument.
That's fair. And that's fair. I want Michigan to be miserable. And I don't think, if it's just trying to be able to get a one-upmanship and banter, I don't give a crap about that. I want their program to actually be affected. And one way to actually do that is going to be taking sure that
away wins over.
No, that doesn't do it. That doesn't do anything to their program.
Yes, it does.
What does it do? What does it do? Please explain that to me. How does it impact their program?
It wounds their pride because it says you haven't had a legitimate win over Ohio State in a decade and a half.
So there's a 5-star cornerback who's going to be damn, that their pride has been wounded. I will not go to this team because they don't. Nobody cares about that.
What 5-star cornerbacks are they getting? They're all going to Ohio State.
Well, my point is that doesn't impact Michigan in the future one bit. That doesn't matter to them.
I'm not talking about the players on the team or the coach.
I am, because I want them to lose.
I'm talking about the fans and the trolls that we have to engage with on a regular basis. We need ammunition in the war against those people.
Hey,
in the ongoing Toledo war that never ended, that is what we need to
I reject the Treaty of Paris.
Yeah, exactly. It's
but
never ended, man.
Here's the thing, though. The best way to get one over on a team is to beat them. And the best way for them to lose is to be better than them. And the best way to ensure that is to make sure that they don't get good players.
Which might happen this year. And imagine the double whammy of not only, finally getting the first win over them in 4 years this year, but then having the wins of the last 3 seasons in which Stalions
that actually would be sweet.
And that's my point.
That would be pretty sweet. Pretty sweet.
That is how you wound them. They don't care. They don't care about vacating any of the other games.
That's true.
Except for the wins over Ohio State and maybe Michigan State.
So what you're saying then is like, if they, like, let's say they vacated only like an Indiana win, a Purdue win, a Western Michigan win, you'd be like, I don't care about that. But
no.
it's all about the game wins.
It's always all about the game.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Ways.
That's fair. Hey, I can roll with that.
And if we're in the position where we've already accepted the national championship will not be invalidated, that is a much, much greater concession than a postseason ban. Because first of all, I'm willing to give them more grace as a program than I think a lot of other people are relative to the talent they have coming back, and Sharon Moore actually running the show there now.
Yeah, I think he's a good coach.
Right. But a postseason ban, like, again, if I get to keep a national championship,
they're going to keep it either way.
And at the cost of not being able to participate for the 2 years following that, or possibly even just the next postseason, I'm taking that 10 times out of 10.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's why the punishment, if that's reportedly what is being considered, is not appropriate at all. Now, what's really going to be interesting is if they do end up handing down, I mean, they're supposed to get the notice of allegations out this week.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's going to be I don't know if that's going to include what the punishment is going to be or if they're going to announce that yet. But the timing is extremely significant relative to the Netflix Stalions documentary, Sign Stealer or Steelers, one of those two. Don't quote me on the name, but Stalions is speaking to Netflix for some sort of sum of money about all of this at the end of next month, and that puts, I think, a little bit of heat on the NCAA to get more, or at least provide some sort of greater transparency about what is going to happen before Stalions is able to get on the record and put out a narrative about what is going on here. One that would almost assuredly be backed up by the Michigan beat that we just,
sure.
Slander.
So the Connor Stalions thing, it's part of their, I think it's part of their Untold series, is what they call it. And then the actual episode, I guess, is called Sign Stealer or something like that. So that's August 27th. I'll watch. I'm excited about the Connor Stalions thing. I think it'll be fun to watch. It'll be stupid. And I know the thing is, though, I know it's not going to be great television. It's probably going to be like an hour long. And then 2/3 of it's just going to be soft focus bio crap about Connor Stalions.
Netflix has never produced garbage
that's
throwaway content.
That's right. They've never, that's not their thing. And then there might be like maybe 10 minutes of actual like juicy stuff that I care about. But you know what? That's what happened. 30 for 30 did that too, where they were, this is the inside story. And you're like, where's the inside story? Where's the beef, guys? Like, this is not really worth the the attention that we gave to it. So I don't know.
When they did the Roll Tide War Eagle 30 for 30, and I think that was the one that had Cam Newton on it, and they briefly like overviewed the scandal with
for
him.
like 2 seconds.
And he just kind of looked in the camera and smiled and said, "It's an ongoing investigation." Like,
yeah, and the same thing with
you know what I did, and you can't do anything about it.
Right.
I'm just very worried we're going to get a moment like that from this.
Oh, we definitely will.
This smug vacuum repair salesman.
That's right. The most successful vacuum repair salesman of all time. All right, we've talked about this for a while. I do want to mention a couple other things here before we get to Ask Us Anything. Big Ten Media Days, appropriately boring. You know, there there were a few hiccups, right? Like UCLA's coach not being prepared, and you know, there's some other ridiculousness, and of course, you've got tons of new faces.
I mean, the members of the 11 Warriors beat we referenced earlier called it the worst media statement they've ever heard at Big Ten.
It was pretty bad.
Days.
It was pretty bad. As far as Ohio State guys went, I mean, you got pretty much the rote kind of responses that you would expect, like, "Oh, we're mad about losing Michigan," and you know, we've got great young players, and Chip Kelly's awesome. I did like to see that former UCLA players for Chip Kelly spoke about him really positively. I thought that was pretty cool to see. That doesn't, like, especially with the way that he left, I think that could have created a lot of animosity, and it didn't seem like that was actually the case. So I was kind of
interesting point.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by that they had, you know, really positive things to say about him. Jeremiah Smith, there's a ton of hype that keeps going. No surprise there. One of the things that was said at Indianapolis that I thought was definitely worth mentioning is Ross Bjork talking about $20 million through collectives and brand affiliates, NIL money. Yeah, that's right. $20 million is a lot of money. And I actually wrote, I think a number like 16 million was bandied around. And I even said in an article, I was like, look, that might even be low. And it turned out that it was low. $20 million is a lot of money. I would mention that the Columbus Crew, who have won 2 out of the last 5 MLS Cups, or excuse me, 2 out of the last 3 MLS Cups, have a payroll of about $15 million. So now, granted, a lot more guys on a college football team than a professional soccer team, but still, it just kind of puts in perspective how much money is really being thrown around here.
Well, it's also interesting in the context of what he said a few weeks ago about the $10 million revenue shortfall in the athletic department.
Yep.
So
100%.
You wonder if how much of that is reflected in them not anticipating what they were actually going to have to pay.
Fiscal year ended, and then they started tallying up the numbers, and they were like, "Oh,
we're going to need some more money for these."
That's
fellas.
Right. That's probably exactly what happened. And speaking of some fellas coming, this isn't for football, but for basketball. Quest Glover coming in, he's, I don't know how many years he's played, like 500, but he's shoring up the backcourt.
He started at Florida and then went somewhere between there and Kansas State.
He was at Samford for a minute.
Samford, okay.
Yeah. So he's been all over the place. He'll give you some scoring. Tayson Chapman got hurt. So that sucks. He's out for the season. So you needed a guy to kind of like fill out your roster a little bit. Quest Glover does that. And the interesting thing, as you brought up before we started recording, is that he's not getting a scholarship, but he is being compensated for that scholarship, or at least the equivalent of that.
And they've gone
NIL.
out of their way to say that he isn't a walk-on. So
yes,
he
right.
is a non-walk-on, non-scholarship player, which merits some sort of.
Is he like the first guy? He's got to be the first guy.
Like a mercenary.
He's a Hessian.
I think Matt Guttridge said that instead of what they call it. Oh gosh, he had a funny. What do they call it? Like player without offer, I think.
Oh, PW, yeah.
So he said. I think what was the abbreviation for that?
It's like a PWO.
PWO. So he said MWO. That's what they should call these guys now. So
that's pretty good.
Until we figure out something better to call them, Quest Glover is the first MWO in Ohio State history. So
that's
Columbus.
Good for him, man. And look, I'm glad that that's possible. I guess
keep getting the checks now applies to college basketball.
Yeah, right. So that's pretty wild. And this is kind of related, I guess, going back to football, though. But like the NCAA has decided that they want to try to revamp the roster numbers are going down to 105, but now they're increasing the amount of scholarships available to 105. So maybe to try to get around that a little bit, I guess.
So I want to see a coaching staff of 106 people then. That's what the number is. Unlimited coaching staff, but only 105 players.
I want to see
where we're at.
Oh, I want to see how many people they can fit on the sidelines. Like, I want to, like, kind of like cramming people into a phone booth. I want to see how many people can physically fit on the sidelines of a football field. So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I guess what they're trying to do here is avoid what we kind of just talked about with basketball, where it's like, okay, let's bring on a guy. We're just going to pay a mercenary dude to not get a scholarship, but still get paid. I guess they're trying to avoid that by increasing the amount of scholarships and lowering the total amount of players. But like, I don't think it's going to work. Scholarship is like, it's a different kind of legally binding document than some of the NIL stuff. And I don't know. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Particularly, here's the other thing I would say. All right, let's say a little bit down the line, players decide, and not just players, but the legal system decides that players are officially employees, right? Once you sign that scholarship, you become an employee of the university, okay, which could be coming down the pike in the next year or two. Well, it'd be a lot more convenient for these college football programs and other sports programs to not give these guys scholarships in that event and say, oh, here's a bunch of NIL money. Now we're not beholden to you for like collective bargaining or other stuff. And I think there would be a ton of pressure on guys not to accept that if there was some kind of union or collective bargaining situation in place, because that would essentially make them like scabs almost.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not in the same sense, obviously, because you still would be, you'd have regular players under regular scholarships, but I think that could be a point of contention. I'm really interested to see how that plays out in the next couple of years, particularly as these legal cases go through the system.
Can I bring up one other thing from Big Ten Media Days that I think you kind of glossed over, which I actually thought was the most significant thing relative to Ohio State? Or at least I think it will be, depending on what the outcome is in October. It was interesting that Dylan Gabriel was asked about Ohio State, I think. Who's obviously ended up at Oregon, is now the preseason Heisman favorite.
Yeah.
And, he talked about how I think it seemed like when he was actually available, it was kind of undersold how interested Ohio State was. And he made it clear that Ohio State was, in fact, pretty interested, had multiple conversations with him about transferring to Columbus. But he ultimately felt like Oregon had everything that he wanted, and he was sold more on Oregon than Ohio State.
Well,
I
Uncle
just
Phil
think
might have stepped in too.
Well, right. So you wonder, like, given, the fact that obviously, based on what Bjork said, there was a lot of money that got thrown at, perhaps a little bit more spread around on the team rather than just concentrated on the quarterback position. I can't imagine Will Howard commanded the same money that Dylan Gabriel ended up getting. But at the same time, I think that one thing that could end up becoming a pretty big narrative when these two teams meet in October is, if Ohio State doesn't end up winning that game and Gabriel plays well and Howard does not, there's going to be a lot of heat, I think, around, did Ohio State go after the quarterback as aggressively, or the right quarterback as aggressively as they should have?
Sure.
And did they just end up settling for Will Howard? And was that the right move? And how is that going to dictate how they approach, the transfer portal in, subsequent off seasons, and when they find themselves in other situations where they don't necessarily have a senior signal caller. I said that like dog collar. Like, when they don't have like the guy at quarterback again, how are they going to approach that situation?
Well,
and it was interesting that Gabriel was so candid about that he was like, they were interested, but ultimately I went with this other team that is going to play them in 2 months.
So and we'll also
see
bring up
goes.
it'll also bring up the question about whether or not you pay all of these guys to stay, right? Like if you can't get over the hump against certain teams, and honestly, I think Oregon's a toss up regardless. I don't think that would be a fair narrative because they're a very good football team and you have to play them on the road, right? So like if they lose by like 3 or 4 points or something like that, that's not an indictment of like Tumaloau or Jack Sawyer or anybody like that. That
and
just
given
means
the playoff expansion, it's not the end of the world anymore in the same way that it would have been last season or in the seasons prior with the smaller CFP.
But I do think you're right in saying that that's going to still be questions that people will be asking. It's going to be because that's just the nature.
Yeah, if they lose for sure.
Exactly. That's just
now,
the nature of college
win, it's going
to
be like, oh, the greatest value play of all time in the portal, and who needs Dylan Gabriel?
Yeah, greatest value play.
Especially if Caleb Towns pick sixes him or something.
Which, yeah, that'd be pretty wild.
I would like to see it.
I would too. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff going on in the world of college football, even among the usually controlled, less crazy environment of Big Ten media days.
And that's just half the show with legitimate news points. We're not even going to get into the goofy stuff until Ask Us Anything.
Well, Ask Us Anything is
talk about, of course.
That's right. So let's do that. We want to remind you before we do Ask Us Anything that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com, drygoods.11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers. Check it out. Good stuff. Anti-Wolverine Social Club. It's a great shirt. Get it. Ask us anything. You can ask us literally anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com. All right, let's start here. This is from Tim. Hey y'all. Hey Tim. Yeah, y'all. It's fine.
Do we have a region tied to where Tim is hailing from?
I don't know. He doesn't divulge that information, but he does want to know. This is a regional question. He says, "What is your personal ranking of the Ohio 3 Cs? Alternatively, what's your favorite?" All right, so that's your fake laugh indicating? If
you've listened to this show at any point over the last year, you should already know what the answers to this question is going to be.
I don't know.
Go ahead and start, Johnny.
No, I don't know what yours is.
Oh,
I've only been to Cleveland a few times. I've only been to Cleveland like 3 or 4 times. So I can't and I grew up near Cincinnati. So I have mixed feelings on all of this. I can't give you a definitive one. Right. I live in Columbus. I love Columbus. It's a great city. I would put in terms of livability above Cleveland and Cincinnati. I would say that would be a one, but in terms of like culture and, like general aesthetics, Cincinnati's probably got them beat, right? But Cleveland's on the lake. That's pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff that Cleveland's got going for it. So I don't know.
The water in Cleveland is flammable. Let's not forget.
It used to be flammable
before you start talking allegedly.
To be. No, not allegedly. It was flammable. It caught on fire. The Cuyahoga River caught on fire.
No, but you're saying allegedly times. It's no longer flammable.
Oh yeah. Well,
I'm saying let's test that theory. Anyway, my point is I've slandered that cesspit enough over the year plus that I've since taken over on this show that people should know that that's going to be at the bottom of my list for sure.
I think with Cleveland. I don't think it's that bad.
I think the way that you worded the dilemma in deciding between Columbus and Cincinnati is perfect. I think in terms of conventional things that you look for in a city, Columbus has gradually grown, especially as one of the 15. When I was coming into Ohio State, it was it had become already one of the 15 biggest cities in the United States. Yeah. And it has only since it was 14th. I remember.
Kind of.
I
put it
in my admissions essay and I didn't get rejected. So it was fact.
Let me just clarify. So it is one of the top 15 largest cities in the country. If you go by specifically within the city limits, but that's deceptive because metropolitan area, it's way lower than that. And so it's kind of, it's iffy there
by the book city limits. We're saying it.
Sure.
I'm saying in terms of conventional city, the stuff that you look for, I would say that Columbus is probably superior, but you're absolutely right. In terms of having more of a personality and kind of charm about itself, the times I've been to Cincinnati, I've always had a great time.
Cincinnati's
And I cannot say the same about when I have been to Cleveland. Oh my God. I don't care what you say about the lake, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's lame. I don't like it.
That city is gross. It is the worst city in Ohio. I would rank
that's not even remotely true.
I have never even been to Dayton, and I would say it's worse than Dayton. It's lower than Dayton on the list.
Dayton's fine. Oregon District's pretty sweet.
It's 1A, 1B, Columbus, Cincinnati, and then 9001 is Cleveland.
Okay. Cleveland's fine. I don't have any problem with Cleveland. I don't have any weird irrational hate for it.
I do.
Yeah, I clearly. I mean, we've spent the past 5 minutes talking about it, but yeah, I don't know.
Waiting for this, Johnny.
Yeah, clearly. It's fine. Yeah, I still would probably go. I have a lot of problems with Cincinnati in different ways, but I really do enjoy the fact that it's legitimately.
It's mostly the smug aura of Cavs and Browns fans. that's what's worse than anything.
Well, I don't disagree with that. Cincinnati's weird because they're like, I don't know. There are some very wealthy parts of Cincinnati, and they want to pretend
over the Rhine.
Well, no, over the Rhine's completely gentrified.
I know
it's totally different.
I know it's different now.
It's 100% different.
But when I've been there, it still had that rep.
Yeah, no, I mean, I went down when it was the most dangerous, neighborhood in the United States. But I guess my point is, they have these like super wealthy enclaves that want nothing to do with the rest of the city, and like. Those people are kind of jerks sometimes. Like they're turds, and the rest of the city is pretty chill and cool. But
I will say the most dangerous Uber I've ever been in was on the way back from the bars in Cincinnati, where the driver was going 100 miles an hour on the highway. And I remember I was with like my buddies from Ohio State, and I remember looking over to my friend's girlfriend, who is now his wife, and I just remember looking at her and seeing the fear in her eyes, like, are we going to die in this car right now?
Maybe.
The guy was like blasting techno music with all the windows down, going 100 miles an hour on the highway, and I was just like, you know what, this is the Cincinnati experience right here. And even that was better than any memory I have in Cleveland.
Okay. All right. So real quick. So also another thing real quick, what's your favorite Ohio city, town, village, municipality, etc.? So what's your favorite place to hang in Ohio? Aside from the the entirety of Columbus or whatever.
Yeah, because I mean that's kind of going to be my answer. I spent a lot of time, like, even though I've talked about it before, I grew up in Chicago. My mom's family is from St. Clairsville, so I've got very fond memories of that little corridor of Ohio out by Wheeling, West Virginia.
Yeah.
I have nicer things to say about the Akron area, specifically Jackson Township. That's where my cousins grew up and still live, than I do about Cleveland. It's unfortunate to me that Akron gets attached at the hip with Cleveland, because I wish I could speak much more fondly on Akron than the third C among the big C's, as we just alluded to. But yeah, I've only ever driven through Toledo. I've never actually spent any time there. But yeah, I guess,
Toledo's I haven't spent a lot of time in Toledo either.
I would say St. Clairsville or Jackson Township by default.
But, I like, what? I'm a big fan of Logan, that whole area down, in Hocking Hills and whatnot. I think that's it's beautiful down there, and I always have a good time whenever I'm down there. And that's, that's just my kind of vibe. Like, it's a little slower. Athens is a really cool place. I really like that town. So that's more my speed, I think. This one's from Kevin here. Would you buy a season ticket for one meaningful game? Maybe they should put the new Ohio Stadium on the Oval. It is the center of the university. I don't think that's going to happen. But would you? I would, because here's the thing: you buy the ticket, you buy the season
like we
pass for
talked
one.
about last year,
Yeah,
or last week rather.
yeah. You buy
get
the
to go to
season
the
ticket for one
Michigan
game, you sell the other ones. Absolutely,
right,
you do
which
that.
is what plenty of people do, and it's probably one of the reasons why they sold more packages this year than they have in the last 15 years.
Yeah, and by the way,
I can understand it.
Yeah, I don't think I wouldn't hate on anybody for making that move. When I was in college, I was like, no, you go to every game that you. It's like, Now I'm like, okay, like, do you really need to see Ohio State beat Florida A&M by 70 points? Probably not in the middle of September. I don't know. I think that's totally fine if you want to sell that ticket. Also, Jonathan wrote a question here. It says, with the news that Michigan will most likely get postseason bans, do you think the rest of college football will view Michigan's championship with an asterisk? We talked about that earlier in the Dubcast. I don't know. I think it's possible, but the problem is that so much of this is adjudicated on the field, right? Where, God, if Ohio State had beaten Michigan, even if all other things being equal, right? If that game had played out exactly the way it played out, but Ohio State scores a touchdown on that last drive and wins the game, the narrative is completely different around all of this. Is that fair or logical? No. But that's what would have happened, because people would have then said, oh, see, you can't beat Ohio State without cheating. And again, does that change anything? Not really, but it definitely changes how people perceive this whole thing. So I don't know. It's possible, and it'll be interesting to see what the actual punishment for the NCAA is. I'm not sure how that'll play out. That's a good question.
Real quick, to give a more legitimate answer to the previous question about like beloved niche Ohio cities.
Okay.
Lancaster has an excellent
okay.
house.
There you go. Right. I think they have racks too. I think they still have racks, which was like, it was supposed to be fancy Arby's. Last one here from our good friend Alvin. What is your favorite underground artist or band that never took off?
This is a bad question for me because I'm such like a normie when it comes to
all right.
music.
The music. That's okay. There's a couple band. I went to a CD. I think at the time it was still CD 101. I can't remember what it was. Maybe 1025. I don't know what their call sign was. But they had these thing called Lodo shows where you could just get in for like $5, and it was all these like kind of minor acts that weren't necessarily, like super underground, but they also weren't like really well known. They were just in heavy rotation on the station, and the big one at the time was Louis the 14th, which I was ambivalent about. I was like, okay, whatever, they're fine. But there was another band called the Duke Spirit, and they blew the roof off the thing. I mean, they had an incredible set. And the thing about the Lodo shows is that these bands would come in, they play like 3 or 4 songs and get out, and that was it. And they would just rotate as many of these bands as they could. And the Duke Spirit absolutely freaking killed it. I had heard a couple of their songs and I thought they were pretty good, but live they were unbelievable. And yeah, I always felt bad that they never really got the kind of popularity that I think they kind of deserve. They have they've got several very good albums, and I don't think they're together anymore. But if you're interested, maybe check out their music, because I thought they were pretty cool. I don't think they got their due. So, and another one, there's this lady named Erica Warnerstrom I think she's from Cincinnati, Southwest Ohio area, Cincinnati/Dayton. And she had a band called the Heartless Bastards, and I really liked them too. I thought they were pretty good. They got big for a hot second and then kind of fell off the radar, but she's great. She's an excellent musician.
Yeah, I've got a pretty versatile taste in music. Like, I pretty much will tolerate anything except for country, because I think every song sounds the same, or at least has the same subject matter. But the problem is, because of that, because I'm so spread out, I'm never really going to go down in the weeds of a genre to dig up something that I am going to but may not be super big or relevant yet. So I unfortunately don't really have an answer to that question that I think would satisfactorily qualify as underground.
I think,
and I owe that to my dad. He he was the type of guy that would rent CDs from the library and then burn them and take all the. That's how he would get.
Hey,
all
library doesn't ask questions, man.
Right, exactly.
We're here to disseminate
but because
information.
of that, he had a wealth of music from all sorts of different decades and genres that I was exposed to growing up. So
That's
I
great.
have, a lot. I there's a lot that I vibe with, but the thing is, like, because it's all CDs you can get at the library, it's like, those are obviously people that made it. So
Right.
I don't, unfortunately, I don't have a very raw niche taste, so I don't have any good answers to that question.
I think it's harder.
I apologize.
I think it's harder these days to kind of do that because everything's like Spotified and
it's all curated.
It's all curated, which is kind of like, I don't know. I hate that a little bit. When I was younger and before social media really took off and before, they had all these ways to curate people's music, you really kind of had to make an effort. And so doing that made you feel like you had more ownership of the music that you liked, that you found, that you kind of discovered on your own a little bit. And you're like, okay, like I can find other things. And so I would go to Used Kids Records and just pick up CDs that I thought were cool and, buy them for $1. Or I would go to the Lodo shows and just, check out bands I'd never heard of. And part of that too is me getting older and like having more responsibilities. Like I can't just, screw off and do whatever I want like on a weekend and spend an entire weekend just like bumming around downtown and looking for shows to go to. Like I can't do that. Have a toddler, try to potty train them. It's kind of part of the whole thing.
Destructive cat,
just pooping everywhere. God, I hate this. Anyway,
we love you, Jasper.
Yeah, he's great. So anyway, my point is that I do think it's gotten a little bit more difficult to participate in the finding of underground stuff these days. And I'm sure you still can. Like I've got former students, they'll put pictures on Facebook or Instagram where they're like, "Oh, check me out at this like basement show." I'm like, "Wow, that's kick ass. It's so cool that you're doing that." But I don't really have time. So if you have suggestions, like I mentioned the Duke Spirit, you guys know I like rap. I'll listen to pretty much anything. If you have suggestions, send them over. Like I'd like stuff that just goes, you know what I mean? Like that's the kind of dude. So I am. So I would appreciate any recommendations that people have. So that's Ask Us Anything for this week. Keep sending those questions in. We'll keep answering them. Remember, football season's right around the corner. So if you want to start asking about the team, let's get into it. Real quick before we get out of here, we've got some quick hitters. Olympics are going on, which George is just like an Olympics fiend. You can ask him any question about any sport. He knows every single one he's watched.
The greatest opening ceremony I've ever seen.
I actually thought it kind of ruled. Like, honest, it's like no joke.
Wow, you're the only person with that take I've heard, to be honest.
I don't care. Good. No, here's the thing. I didn't think it was good per se, but it was the only time I've ever seen anything like that. I give a lot of points to stuff.
To all the listeners, I apologize on Johnny's behalf.
Don't apologize. I make no apologies for liking a cool thing. I mean, they tried to do something interesting and unique, and they did, and I appreciate that. I would rather see that than
tried.
Well, fine. That's fine. I give points to people for trying. The thing is, man, like, they could have gone into a stadium and done another choreographed thing and blah, blah, blah that we've seen a trillion times, or they could have actually, like, leaned on the really cool cultural and geographical landmarks that Paris has, and that's what they did. And I thought it was pretty sweet. I thought the Marie Antoinette thing where they were like in the, in the house, and then they had like her holding her own head, and there was like blood spurting out, and they had like a metal band playing. That was sick. That was freaking sweet. So
it was too close to burlesque for me.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm fine with that, man. It's Paris, dude. Like, what do you want? Speaking of Paris, the actual athletes performing in Paris, there's a number of Ohio State athletes that are represented in different countries, not just United States, but France, Germany, Lithuania, Ireland, Nigeria, Canada, all over the place. Probably the biggest and most notable victory thus far. And granted, the Olympics have been going on for a couple days, but Hunter Armstrong, really, if you watch the 4x100, the relay, the swimming relay, he killed it, man. He had the best leg, which usually the third leg is reserved for the slowest guy. But he had the fastest split. It would have been a world record had he been starting from the blocks. Had he started from the blocks and being the first guy, he would have gotten it. But reaction times being what they are, they don't give you the world record if you're inside of a if you're 2 through 4 in a relay.
That's a shame.
Yeah, well, it's because you can anticipate it, right? Like you can see exactly when you have to start, so your reaction time's faster. But anyway, he killed it. He was unbelievable in his leg. He's probably a big reason why they ended up winning that relay and continuing the streak of United States just dominating that particular event. That was sweet. Unfortunately, he bombed out in one of the backstroke events, possibly because he worked himself so hard in the relay. But good on him, getting another gold medal. That's pretty awesome on his part. Also, pivot to Georgia real quick. Another really crazy thing with Georgia. I mean, again, they've been in the news so much for the driving offenses and whatnot, but in this case, we've got a Georgia wide receiver, Rara Thomas, jailed on multiple counts. He got suspended from the team. They did the right thing in this instance. Like, he was suspended indefinitely pretty much immediately after this stuff came down. But I just don't know. The phrase is lack of institutional control. I don't know when that starts to apply. I saw another statistic where Georgia has, graduated an incredibly low amount of, of football players on their team recently.
It was at least below 50%. It might.
Yeah, I can't verify the numbers. I feel like it was just a random Twitter account that might not know what the hell it's talking about. But it seems weird. It just seems like there's not a whole lot of control going on in that program.
It was noticeably lower than any other major college football program.
Right. And if that's the case, if that's actually true, then I don't know. I just think there's some serious questions to be had about what Kirby Smart is doing with that team, how much influence he actually has over, these kids' actions, and what school's doing to set them up for success, because it's just like one thing after the other with that program. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, this one stands out, of course, because the big headline is, one account of battery and one count of cruelty to children.
Right.
The cruelty to children, which is a felony, it was ruled as second degree. So it's an important distinction relative to first degree, just because, according we're not lawyers on the Dubcast, but according to the definition,
we're not,
typically involves some sort of direct violence on the child when it's first degree as opposed to second degree. In the case of second degree, it's usually just them being a witness to it and them suffering some kind of emotional distress as a result. So it seems like this was some sort of domestic dispute that turned physical with the children present, and that is what has resulted in the headline being not to downplay what took place, but just the fact that the headline reads as it does. I think whenever you see that, the phrase cruelty to children, your imagination kind of runs wild in terms of what happened. Now, had wide receiver Rara Thomas committed cruelty to children in the sense of hitting this child with a car that was going over 100 miles an hour, well, maybe Kirby Smart would have been more willing to not indefinitely suspend this player. But,
look the other way.
Let's not speculate on things that haven't happened.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, it's unfortunate and sad, and all those other adjectives that we can apply to it. I just don't know what Georgia needs to be doing at this point to
this doesn't really fit the framework of the stuff that we talked about a short while ago, but I do think that lack of institutional control is absolutely the appropriate phrase here. I don't know if there's a grander crime problem that goes beyond the stuff that we've seen relative to reckless driving, but that specifically, the pattern of offenses is indisputable at this point, that there's a problem at that program.
It's been dozens, right? Just in the past 2 or 3 years. What?
It's been over 300 instances since Kirby Smart became their head coach in 300. 325 was the number from a couple weeks ago that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported. That's
insane. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so lack of institutional control, I think, is perfectly appropriate. Now, and again, what has happened in the case of this wide receiver, I think, is more it's more of a story because this guy was supposedly going to play a big role in Georgia's offense in the upcoming season, combined with the fact that you have that phrase cruelty to children. involved.
Mhm.
I don't think it necessarily fits the ongoing narrative relative to the lack of institutional control thing. I think this is more of an isolated incident relative to the bigger problem Georgia has, but Georgia still has a problem with this stuff. It just is in a much different area than where these crimes were committed.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and they've since indefinitely suspended this player, and
Which is the right move. I mean,
given the
that's,
traction of this story, I doubt that he's gonna see the field in short
yeah,
order.
I don't think so either. Which again is the right, it's the right thing to do. And you just, I don't know, man. They got to figure something out down there.
We're calling
Carmen's,
them the new parole tide.
yeah, there you go. Carmen's crew continues to dominate. They are into the semifinals of the basketball tournament. TBT, third-ranked Carmen's crew.
They were up by like 40 points at one point over the team they played in the quarterfinals.
Yeah,
the commentary team called it perhaps the greatest shooting performance in any TBT game in history. It was quite a sight to see. They started 15 of 30 from three. And it just
16,
leaves you wondering why Jared Sullinger didn't expand his range for the first few years he was at Ohio State.
Well, he didn't learn the shot till he went to like China or whatever. Like you gotta, sometimes it takes a minute. But yeah, that's pretty funny, and I hope they continue to play because they've got dudes from all over the place. They got dudes in their 40s contributing. That makes me feel pretty good about my life. I like that. Like, hey man, just give me a couple years. I'll get in a game shape and I can start raining buckets.
And not just dudes in their 40s, but Japanese expats in their 40s.
I love it,
which makes Johnny very happy.
Of course it does. Lastly, if you've been playing College Football 25 as I just did, I have it on loan from the library.
How did you do that, Johnny?
Well, you get your library card and you put it on hold and there you go. You get it.
You mean you can get games at your local library?
You can. And apparently you can play as Ohio State, which has been like banned in tournaments or something now. What's yeah, like you can't play it in like betting tournaments.
There's a specific app that allows competitive wagering between people. So it's like if you want to go further than just playing an online game and put money on it, this platform gives you the ability to do that. However, they have said that due to OP abilities for both the Kansas running back and Quinshon Judkins for Ohio State, you're no longer allowed to do that.
That's really fun. There was that really,
with Judkins, it is because he has the most overpowered spin move in any football video game ever. And if you haven't, there's some good examples in the article that it says written by 11 Warrior staff. I'll give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain and tell you that Garrick was the one that wrote that up.
Yeah.
But Garrick failed to include the most egregious example of the bunch, two of the most egregious examples of the bunch, one of which a guy playing against Georgia literally does the Judkins spin move 8 times in a row in opposite directions, like at least 50 yards down the field, in a way that is just completely unnatural movement for a football player relative to not losing any stamina. And then the other example, some guy does like two instances of the spin earlier in the play, but then the third one he does, he's playing against Notre Dame. He successfully evades 7 defenders on Notre Dame with one spin move.
That rules.
I mean, it's just the height of comedy. It is. If now this, I feel bad for Judkins because he's gonna have like,
oh yeah, they're gonna meme the hell out of that.
Ohio State fans are gonna be happy with whatever they get from the guy because we predominantly I think want to see Travion Henderson do well, and then whoever else comes in after that is just gravy because the guy's coming from another program and just hasn't been here as long. But Judkins, for the people that don't play as Ohio State in this game, has now drawn the ire of the college football 25 universe for being this overpowered Bo Jackson Tecmo Bowl clone. And so if he does not perform up to standard or even do one Braxton Miller caliber spin move the entire football
no, he's got to do 8 in a row.
People are going to cry bloody murder on EA, which, you know what? we were trying to warn you how goofy this game was going to be, and even though
Well,
Johnny has more experience than I do at this point,
yeah,
I feel very vindicated by this controversy. That I personally, I need balance in my sports games.
sure.
If it's comes down to just last team that has the ball, which granted is how some college football games really do end up playing out. But if you don't have an ability to legitimately defend yourself, and you're having to deal with goofy instances where the guy on the other team can just spam the B button all the way down the field, as we have video evidence of seeing across America at this point, like 2 weeks into the game's release, there's something wrong with your product.
Well,
Something's got to give.
the issue is that it's like, if you have a game that's trying to be, a very highly detailed, highly accurate sports sim, you can't have stuff like that, right? Like that's not going to work. The problem is EA Sports.
You had 10 years to get this right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's the thing, because the game does sell itself as like something that's hyper realistic. It's true to life, all that kind of stuff.
The
and then
pageantry of college.
Yeah,
football.
exactly. And then you see that and it takes you out of it. Unfortunately, again, I've only played it for a little bit. I'm going to play it some more. We'll do like an official kind of review here in a little bit. But there are a lot of those things that I'm seeing where it's like, it just takes you out of the experience because it feels kind of awkward and not authentic. If it wasn't supposed to be like that, it's totally fine. If you just had a goofy little game where it was like, kind of exaggerated and weird, like nobody cares. Like NBA Jam is an awesome game. People have giant heads sometimes and their shoes catch on fire, and that's awesome. But that's because that's what you expect of that game going into it. If you're playing College Football 25, you're like, oh, this is this great, sim. It's going to be super true to life. And then you can just, spam, the twist button. You can spam the juke button with Quinshon Judkins and win the game. People don't really like that. So we'll see how it goes.
Now, I do have to say, we did a podcast when the first trailer came out a while ago, in which our lead topic was, is there an anti-Ohio State agenda in EA Sports College Football 25?
Right.
And it turns out it's quite hilarious that regardless of whether there is or not, it's funnier if there was. But the fact that they accidentally gave Ohio State one of the
this
two
OP
most
player.
overpowered players
Yeah.
in the game is an extremely hilarious turn of events.
It's pretty good. I will say I've played one game with it, and I definitely decided that I needed to beat Michigan 73 to 3, I think, or something like that. 74 to 3. I can't remember what the exact score was, but I had a good time with it. So that's the Dubcast for this week. We will be back next week to talk about all kinds of things related to college sports and beyond. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you then.
Take care, folks.